The Dallas Cowboys are going to have to make some big decisions in the NFL draft. We'll tell you how positional value can help them next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us the #1 sports podcast network. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. He is Landon McCool. And on today's show, we're going to talk about positional value. This is something that has been thrown around all these podcasts and articles over the last couple of years. I'm sure you've heard us talk about this before. But we wanted to really dive into what it means, why it's important, and how the Cowboys can use it to help them make decisions this offseason. So, Landon, the floor is yours. Do your best to explain to our listeners what positional value is.
Well, it starts with, the money that these players are expected to earn on a free agent situation, right? And that's kind of where we start the conversation is some players, because of scarcity of their body type, because of the value that they have to the team versus relative to other positions, every position is kind of valuated at a different rate, and I mean valuation literally. I mean like at a dollar and cents sort of way, and that bleeds into the conversation of drafting, right? Because even though there is a salary cap, and even though that the rookies are on a different scale than the veterans, it's effective, and it's all affected by what they ultimately will make, what the franchise tags are, and it's all kind of connected. And so positional value is about keeping in mind which positions are paid the highest on a kind of free agent basis, or when it's time to re-sign them, and trying to get the most amount of value by drafting those positions high and in controlling those costs on a rookie deal, and leveraging that as best you can. Now, I think there's a point where people maybe go a little too far. We'll talk about that too.
Never.
But never. But I do think that it is an important thing to pay attention to. It's more than just a tiebreaker, I would say. It's a huge part of long-term team building to make sure that you're controlling your costs by making sure that you're drafting expensive players onto cheaper rookie deals.
Generally, the way that the NFL has looked at it, we call these the money 5 positions, the 5 positions that are the most important to winning. Now, we can debate the order a little bit, but for the most part, it goes quarterback number 1. We all know that. That's the most important position. Edge rusher, offensive tackle, wide receiver, cornerback. Those are your top 5. I do think it's changed a little bit in the sense that defensive tackle and edge rusher are really the same. We could just call it pass rushers. Those are the guys that are really, really valuable. And then there's a drop off. And I think when you get to guards, centers, run stopping defensive tackles, off ball linebackers, running backs, and safeties, they're just on a different tier. Now, the tricky part of this, and this is what we're going to talk about today, is how big is the gap between those money 5 positions in the next tier positions, and how much better does an off-ball linebacker need to be than an offensive tackle in order to get drafted high? All that's up for debate, but I think if you just stick to those money 5 positions, and those are typically the positions that get paid the most on the open market and in free agency, you'll see a trend of those guys, becoming more valuable than everybody else.
Yeah, and as we've seen, like there's been some calibration there a little bit with some of that. Like it used to be that it was only the left tackle that was considered to be money 5,
right.
and that's changed over time. And honestly, there was a time when the thought was wide receiver 1s really are only the guys that you want to pay, but that's not necessarily been even true these last few years. So there's definitely been a lot of, and this is constantly being kind of recalibrated depending on a number of variables, not just the the inherent value of the position, as I just discussed, but also trends and changes in the game and stock, a draft stock on a year-to-year basis may have an effect there as well. So there's lots of variables here. There is some kind of steadying elements to it that seem to kind of hold true throughout the years, but there is also a lot of room for this to kind of change and reform depending on the way that the game is going and the way that the kind of contracts or situations are going as well.
Well, and we should mention contracts, because this is the big thing when we talk about like fifth-year options and franchise tags. And one of the big problems the NFL has right now is they don't describe the positions well enough. And what I mean by that is they only have a couple of designations for these positions. It's quarterback, wide receiver, linebacker, offensive line, defensive end, defensive tackle, corner, safety, tight end, running back, special teams. What makes this hard for a guard, and let's use the Cowboys example of Tyler Booker. The NFL does not really categorize it as a tackle versus a guard. So when a fifth-year option comes up, like an example would be this year, Tyler Booker, if he doesn't make a Pro Bowl, is going to have a fifth-year option of $20 million. If he makes one Pro Bowl, the fifth-year option is going to be $25 million. If he makes more than one Pro Bowl, you're talking about $28 million. Obviously, you're going to be happy if Tyler Booker makes a Pro Bowl, but now you are paying a right guard, left tackle money, and that's where things get really tricky. And when it comes to this upcoming draft class, if you're looking at somebody like, let's say, Sonny Styles, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because players like Micah Parsons and TJ Watt and Myles Garrett are called linebackers in a 3-4, the NFL views them as linebackers when it comes to the franchise tag and the fifth-year option. So if you were to franchise a linebacker, it would cost you $28 million. Landon, is there a linebacker outside of, maybe even including Fred Warner, that's worth $28 million for a single season right now?
Yeah, no, there's not, and that's the problem, right? And I think that it feels like this is something that has been a shared problem between the NFL ownership and the agents, right? Like there's been manipulation on all sides here as these, they try to negotiate the best price or the highest salary for their respective sides. But yeah, it's become extremely problematic when, and it even gets broken down further than that. Like, the particular type of safety that you are could really dictate the amount of money that you make. The type of wide receivers that you are could really dictate the type of money you can make. So I think that, it probably doesn't need to be quite broken down to that level, but it certainly needs to be broken out and resorted in a way that it feels like the position and the way that they're bucketed needs to be kind of fixed. And the edge position, outside linebacker specifically, is incredibly egregious because of what it does to the linebackers, and because edge is, offensive line is just as bad, right? Because it includes a money five, and they got to find a way to kind of break those groups apart, bucketize them a little bit more, and prevent agents and teams from manipulating the system by improperly labeling or improperly bucketing these guys into the wrong spot.
Now, I'm not saying that you need to completely avoid like a Sonny Styles because you're worried about the fifth-year option. And I know there's people saying, well, just sign him to a contract earlier and you don't have to worry about it. Well, if you're Sonny Styles, he knows that a fifth-year option is going to make him the highest paid linebacker in the league by a ton of money. So it's fully guaranteed. So that's just going to be factored into any contract discussions. Maybe this will get changed in the next CBA, but as it stands right now, it's a really, really big deal, and it should impact how you're valuing these positions in the draft. We'll talk about how the Cowboys can use it to their advantage next. This episode is brought to you by Indeed. If you've ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit, you know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. Hiring Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidates faster. I know that if I ever needed to hire someone for this show, I would go straight to Indeed and be very specific about what I needed, which is real experience and not just some resume buzzwords. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes with less stress, less time, and more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. And listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement that it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. If you haven't done so already, check out the new Everydayer Club. You're going to get ad-free episodes to the Locked On Cowboys podcast for just $5 a month. Go to lockedoncowboys.supercast.com to join the club or tap the link in the show notes. All right, Lena, let's talk about the Cowboys' biggest needs this year. We know that they need linebacker help. We know that they need edge rush help. They also need corner and safety help. How should they prioritize these needs? I mean, there's varying levels of needs with positional value, because I'm looking at their first, the 2 first-round picks, and you look at like some of the consensus boards, and it's a lot of safeties and linebackers at the top of the draft. How would you value it here for Dallas?
You have to be really careful here, right? Like, and I think this is where people make mistakes with positional value, is that they listen too much with their pocketbooks and they're not watching with their eyes. Right. And I think that what it is that you have to take it all in and consider the money that's there. And I think there are, I know I spent the last segment saying that it's more than a tiebreaker, but there are times when you have to realize that it can't be more than a tiebreaker, right? Where if there is a guy that is, a step up, even if he's at a position that's less valuable, then you should take the better player, right? And I think that there is a point where that there may be diminishing returns there, and I think that that's where you have to be careful, is kind of, because what you end up having to do is kind of evaluate the difference between the two players, right? Is the if I'm going to be paying this player, $4 million over the average linebacker because he was drafted at a certain spot, and I'm saving $3 million at the average cornerback spot by drafting a cornerback at that equivalent spot, then is the difference, that $1 million difference or $7 million difference worth it for this player? Is he that much better? And I think that's a really hard thing to do, right? So to me, I think you have to look at the ones that are the money 5, right? The edge of the corners, and you give them slight deference. And if all things are being equal there, I think the need is probably equal. You probably could say the corner might be a little bit more of a need, but I think if they were all being equal as far as need levels, I think that you look at the situation and you say edge, corner, those are your money 5 spots. If we get to 12, there's somebody at equal levels at all 3 spots. I'm going to take a preference at edge or corner, just because I'm going to end up saving a whole bunch of money by doing so. And, like you said, especially with that as high as 12, there's some pretty significant amount of money that you're going to have to pay a player like Sonny Styles if you want to pick up his 5th-year option or re-sign him, because that money is locked in as soon as you draft that guy.
And this is where I struggle a little bit. I mean, longtime listeners of this show know my biases against running backs. However, I'm looking at like the 2023 draft. The Falcons hit on Bijan Robinson. He's everything they could have imagined and more. They drafted him with the 6th overall pick. He was the 5th player on the consensus board. So technically they got value. Really good pick. And then you watch the Super Bowl and you see someone like Christian Gonzalez, who was 8th on the consensus board, so a little bit lower, but at a more important position. And I think to myself, what would Atlanta have to trade with Bijan Robinson right now to get Christian Gonzalez? Like, there's no way New England would flip those two guys straight up. In fact, they would probably want multiple picks attached. And if both of those guys were available in free agency right now, Gonzalez is probably making upwards of $8 million more a year. This is where I struggle. Like, how far down do you value? Like, if a guy's 6 on your board and he's a linebacker, but a corner is ranked 9 on your board, do you take the corner or do you just simply take the better player?
To me, I don't view it like positioning. I view it more like certainty, right? Like, that's where I think I want to be making the decision on that level. It's like, do I feel like, hey, I feel really like this guy is an extremely high floor linebacker, right? Like that makes me feel like I think that I have a higher rate of odds of success because I think that this guy is going to come in and there's very little chance that he's going to bust versus a cornerback who, and again, I'm just putting out a hypothetical situation. I'm not saying that this is all situations against a cornerback who maybe like you view as a high variance corner, right? Like, oh, he could be a superstar, but he could also be out of the league in 3 years, right? So I think to me, that's kind of like how I would view those situations through that lens. Like, if I feel like that player is a more high floor player at that position, then I'm going to ignore some of the positional value because I'm factoring in the fact that I think he's going to make it versus how detrimental it would be to have to cut a first round corner, regardless of how much money I'm saving, from him at a position, if he can't even start on my team. So I think that's kind of where, to me, I would reach past positional value and say, no, I don't care. I'm taking the player that I feel like has a higher likelihood to hit. But outside of that, I think you're right. Like, I think, just to a certain degree, I'm probably not going to draft a running back in the top 10 again, or at least as soon, there's certain positions that you feel like there's just better options, right? There's just better choices.
Now, the NFL has done a good job of, pushing the rookie wage scale down. It used to be these guys would come into the league and they would already be some of the highest paid players at their positions. It's still the case that way for a couple spots. Like, again, if you're drafting a linebacker inside of the top 10 this year, I think that linebacker, again, according to like off-ball linebackers, is already going to be a top 10 paid player at his position. Yes. The same is true for running back. So my question is if you're drafting, and it doesn't even matter, let's say it's Sonny Styles. Sonny Styles at 9, and he's the 8th highest paid linebacker. Are you really getting any value? And my concern is you might think he's a really high floor player, and we both love Styles. But if he ends up being the 9th best linebacker in the league, are you actually losing value there?
Well, and then here comes the other part of that is how much do you value getting value, right? Like, I mean, are you comfortable with taking less value at this spot and maybe getting more value at another spot? I think that's when you kind of have to take a step back and say, look, I mean, I'm not getting great value, but the player that I'm getting in Sonny Styles is something that I'm willing to pay a little bit more for because, again, Sonny Styles is probably not the best example because this is a really deep linebacker class. Yes. But I again, like if all things being equal and you're not so sure about it, I wouldn't necessarily poo-poo it. I'd be like, you know what? I'll pay a little bit more here and I'll try to find value in the back end someplace else, see if I can do it. It just doesn't always work out that way.
No, it doesn't always work out that way. But I do wonder with a team like the Cowboys that has a quarterback that's making a lot of money, and rightfully so. They're paying a wide receiver a ton of money. George Pickens is going to get a ton of money. Is it even more important considering their cap situation to value, the positional value?
Yes, it is. And that's where we should have the Cowboys specific part of this conversation, because my argument does apply in general, but where the Cowboys are right now in a short window at a high leverage spot where you've got a ton of guys, not a small amount of guys making a ton of money at the top. you kind of have to be a little bit extra on the ball with that money, because you just don't have as much of it to spin around. So you do need to calculate for value a little bit more when you haven't calculated for value when re-signing all the rest of the guys that you really like.
All right, so let's put some names to this discussion, because the Cowboys are going to have some big decisions to make at both picks 12 and 20. We'll tell you how they might stack their board next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The winter games are officially here, and if you're anything like us, you're locking into the events that you only get to see on the biggest stage every 4 years, and that's why following the winter games on FanDuel just makes so much sense. From medal counts to individual events to finding your angle on the sports that you care about the most, FanDuel gives you more ways to stay connected to the action. The curling has been unbelievable so far. We're going to get some awesome hockey matches coming up in the next couple of days. FanDuel keeps the entire Olympic experience engaging from start to finish. It's already been a fantastic week of games, and it's only going to get better. The winter games are on, and there is no better way to follow them than with FanDuel. FanDuel, play your game. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We are discussing positional value. And Lena, let's go ahead and talk about some names that the Cowboys could consider. We've talked about Sonny Styles a bunch. You and I both really like him. I'm looking at the expert consensus board right now. Sonny Styles is 7, and the name that we brought up before is Mansoor Delane, the cornerback from LSU. I think if you and I were grading these players, we would both have Styles probably ahead of Delane. I don't want to speak for you, but at least that's my evaluation. But if both are available at 12, considering the Cowboys have needs at both spots, but the cornerback position is far more valuable, how do you stack these ones up?
Yeah, I think that's a tough one. To me, I think that I would probably put Styles just right above Delane, just because I think Delane has some limitations, and we'll talk about.
You're saying as a prospect, correct?
As a prospect, and I think if we're drafting them, I think it's probably Delane, right? Like, I mean, I don't know. Like that one's actually a good example because it's close to me, because it kind of speaks to what I talked about, where I have not some bust concerns with Delane, but there's some physical aspects of his game that I have concerns about, like, and that make me worried that, like, could there be a translation problem? And so I think people like that, it's players like that where I have concerns about their ability to, like, do they have any kind of bust level in them, right? That's where I kind of have some, but I do think that even with that considered, I'm probably still picking Sonny Styles. I think Sonny Styles is a bad example because I love Sonny Styles.
We both love Sonny Styles. He's an awesome player. It's just, there's also the part of it. This is a really good linebacker class. They're easily replaceable.
Yeah. There's a lot there. There's a lot of variables there, that are pushing in opposite directions.
Let me give you a different one. We both like Caleb Downs. I think a lot of people view Caleb Downs as a top 5 player in this class. But would you draft him ahead of David Bailey? And again, I know that these guys probably won't be available for the Cowboys. Yeah. But when you start to consider positional value, David Bailey just plays a much more important position. And I know Caleb Downs can play in the slot a little bit. Would you take Downs over Bailey or Ruben Bain, either player?
Oh, man. Yeah, I think I would. I think I would take Downs over Bailey, but not over Bain. I have Bain very high on my board. Bailey I like a ton, and Bailey I probably, Bailey is, again, this, you picked a really good guy because I think he's probably right there because of the position value. I think Caleb Downs is special, and I also think, again, like you said, he plays some nickel. So I think the positional value argument is lessened there just because he can give you value in other spots too.
And this is the hard part. Like, I mean, I probably would say Downs as well, just because I think he's versatile enough that you can get your value. But if this is your typical safety, your typical free safety, I don't know that I could take that over an edge rusher that's going to play 50 snaps a game, 40 snaps a game. And we know they hit free agency. And this is the other part of it that I wanted to ask you about is how do you value the players? It's almost like a car, right? You buy a new car. The moment you drive it off the lot, their value depreciates and it goes down.
Yeah.
There are some positions like that, the running back is one of them. Linebacker is another that every mile that you put on them, they get worse and worse and worse from a value standpoint. But like you draft a defensive tackle or an edge rusher, look at Quinnen Williams with the Jets, right? The Jets spent the third pick in the draft on Quinnen Williams. They had him for 6 years, and then they were able to cash him in for a first and a second round pick. That's got to weigh in this as well, correct?
Yeah, but I also think that there's another side of that too, where if you look at defensive end, and frankly defensive tackle, which is both notoriously slow positions to kind of develop in, right? You're losing 2 years of cheap labor if they aren't producing at a certain level, right? And I don't think you're going to get that with a guy like Caleb Downs. I think a guy like Caleb Downs probably comes in and hits the ground running. So that's why I think the positional value argument is an important one, but it's often way more nuanced than we give it credit for, because each one of these situations kind of has its own angle that kind of pushes the value one way or another, depending on the situation.
The way that I generally view it is if I'm taking a non-money 5 position in round 1, I really want it to be like an excess value in first round, like a guy that you had 5th on your board, you drafted at 12, or he was 6 on your board, you drafted him at 13. But if it's a money 5 position, I'm actually willing to, draft right on value or even reach maybe a couple spots knowing how valuable they are. Again, that's just my philosophy. That's not every team's philosophy, but I think that's generally a good way to make sure that you're still drafting the right players at the right positions.
Yeah, and I think you also got to have an idea of your larger book, right? Like, because if you've got Tyron Smith on a $10 million a year deal, man, you could afford to screw up and overreach and overpay a rookie here and there because you're saving so much money over there. So there's, like I said, lots of very specific inputs here that kind of can be variables to push this one way or another.
All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. If you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Cowboys ad-free, plus members-only Discord access, and so much more. Head over to lockedoncowboys.supercast.com to join the club. And for those of you on video, we can send you the first ever national NBA YouTube channel. On audio, make your second listen the Locked On NFL podcast. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.